Hey everyone, welcome to video 3.4. Our objective for this lesson is that you are going to be able to read chapters 6 and 7, and we're going to start analyzing the effects of oppression on Peter's life. This is a really important theme for us to understand and for us to follow throughout the book, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Our main question we're thinking about is, what is this word oppression and how does it affect Peter? We've actually seen one of our authors so far in English 10 talk about oppression already. Remember, this is Lorraine Hansberry, the author of A Raisin in the Sun. She's someone I really look up to and admire. Remember, she's a queer Black woman, and she was really groundbreaking for her time. She said, "It really doesn't matter whether you are talking about the oppressed or the oppressor. An oppressive society will dehumanize and degenerate everyone involved." She also said, obviously, the most oppressed group of any oppressed group will be its women, who are twice oppressed. So she brings up a lot of important ideas here. One is that an oppressive society is going to be harmful to everyone involved. So the people being oppressed are obviously being mistreated and pushed down. But she argues that it's also harmful to the oppressors because it really takes away their humanity and removes them from having empathy. She also brings up this idea here that people can be oppressed in multiple ways for their race and their gender, or their gender and their sexuality. And this is something we're going to talk about more later on in this video. So what is this term oppression? This is maybe something that you are already very familiar with or that you already know about, but I want to give us the definition so that we're all on the same page. The kind of fancy long definition here, this comes from Courageous Conversations, which is a program that Robbinsdale Schools actually uses to teach us teachers about oppression and how we can give our students more power and voice. And the definition they give us here is the systematic subjugation or control of one social group by a more powerful social group for the social, political, and economic benefit of the more powerful social group. Let's look at a simpler definition as well. Oppression also means the unfair use of power over a group of people to keep them in a state of disadvantage. So it's essentially when a whole group of people, based on part of their identity, part of who they are treated unfairly and have their power taken away from them so that another group can become even more powerful. And with oppression, we need to think about systems. It's not just one individual person being mean or unfair to another individual person. It's about entire groups of people and systems in our society. So systems, we can think about things like policing or education or housing, and the way that those systems in our country work in ways that are unfair or unequal. So if we think about oppression as kind of a metaphor for, or the birdcage as a metaphor for oppression, if we look close up at just an individual single wire here, it doesn't seem powerful. If we're just thinking about one wire, the bird could easily fly around and get out and be free. It isn't until we take a step back and we look at how all of the wires work together to create a bird cage, and that is when we see the power in the many wires and how they can trap the bird inside. So that's another way to think about oppression, if that is helpful to you. When we talk about oppression, it's really important for us to understand this word intersectionality. This is a term that this woman right here came up with. She is a Black feminist scholar named Kimberly Crenshaw. And she said that intersectionality is the way that as human beings, our many different identities come together to create who we are. And we're not just one thing. Like, we're not just our race. We're not just our age. We're not just our gender or our sexuality. We are all of these things coming together, kind of like a puzzle. So with intersectionality, it's important to understand that each person has unique puzzle pieces of many different identities that come together to create who we are. Intersectionality is recognizing that the puzzle pieces are interconnected and shape our experiences in the world and shape how the world treats us. So multiple identities can interact to create unique patterns of oppression. In order to think a little bit more about intersectionality and describe this, I want to talk about the Barbie movie. So some of us might have seen the Barbie movie over the summer when it came out. This was a really famous movie. And this movie talks a lot about sexism and the way that women have experienced oppression in our world because of sexism and the patriarchy. But this movie has also received a lot of critique and people saying that it ignored intersectionality because it talks specifically about white women's experience of oppression and how white women are oppressed because of being women. But it ignores the fact that women who aren't white experience the world in a different way and experience oppression because of their gender, but also because of their race. So that's why it's really important to think about intersectionality and the way that it interacts to shape our experience in the world. If we think about intersectionality for Peter Raiser, the author of our book, While the Locust Slept, we want to think about his different identities, like how his puzzle pieces fit together. So we know Peter is Indigenous, and so he is often treated differently because of his skin color, because of his culture. We also know that Peter doesn't have much money. He doesn't have any money at all as an orphan. He's not receiving much formal education because John is keeping him out of school. And so all of these kind of puzzle pieces of Peter's identity keep him away from power and make his life experience much harder, right? And so while we read this book, we want to think about how is Peter being marginalized. This is a word we've talked about before, but I want to remind you, the margins or being marginalized, the literal definition of margins is just like the white space on the edge of a piece of paper. And so being marginalized means being pushed from the center of society to the sides, being treated unfairly, and being kind of pushed away from power. So how is Peter being marginalized in this book? He's marginalized by his peers, by other kids at the school who treat him differently for being Native American. He's also treated differently and marginalized by adults. We can see this, remember, when he goes to high school and his teacher ignores him and then glares at him and kind of has a bias or a prejudice against Native Americans. We also see Peter being marginalized by systems. So for this, we can think about the way that the state school kept him separated from his Native American relatives. They didn't let his family visit him. And also the way that kind of the entire orphanage system that he's in makes it really hard for him to have access to any power. He doesn't have money, he can barely get an education, and he doesn't even have the power, it seems, to run away or to fight back. So as you read chapter 6 and 7 and the rest of the book, I want you to think about how Peter is experiencing oppression and being marginalized. But I also really want us to focus on ways that we see Peter or other characters stand up and fight back against this oppression. Because remember, oppression is not just a natural way that things are. These are human-created systems and structures to take power away from people and give power to others. And because they're man-made or they're human-made, we as humans can fight back and change these things as well. So pay attention to this as we keep reading. I hope you enjoy chapter 6 and 7.